I've always worked hard to provide for my wife and 2 kids. We live on a farm we inherited from our grandparents. God rest their souls. We acquired the property shortly after Cindy became pregnant. We were ever grateful since I was between jobs at the time. My grandparents were farmers, so when we got their land and everything they had with it, it made sense that we kept it going. Growing up, I never visited them very much. I finally know why. We moved in late summer, just in time to profit from the fall harvest. Everything was going great at first. My wife took maternity leave from her job, and I spent my days trying to learn how to do everything that needed done. It was a weird and amazing feeling to work the land like a real salt-of-the-earth person. Then the harvest came. After the crops were collected, it appeared my home was surrounded by death, as what remained of the trampled stalks decayed all around. It was completely natural, but something about an empty cornfield is unsettling. As the days grew shorter, I had less time in the day to tend to the rest of the farm. One day in October, it seemed particularly dark, around 5:30 or 6 o'clock. I was at the bottom of the hill our house sat on, right at the edge of the cornfield. I heard a crunch, like something walking over the dead corn stalks. I turned around sharp, but saw nothing. It was probably just a trick of the wind, I thought to myself. I resumed my work, but didn't get far when I heard something else. It was a sound like no other. It reminded me of the way a cat hacks at a fur ball, but significantly louder and deeper. It initiated a primal fear, one that made the hairs on my arm stand up. Goosebumps raced down my spine as adrenaline gave my chest that tingling sensation as it was dumped into my bloodstream. I whipped around and caught a glimpse of what I can only describe as a nightmare. It had a vaguely human shape, but crawled on all fours at an alarming speed. I saw it for only a brief second, but its skin looked dark gray and hairless. It was thinner than most people would look. I didn't really get a good look at its head, as right as I turned around, it ducked into some kind of hole. I dropped the tools I was using and started speed walking back to the house. I don't know if it was instinct or stupidity that kept me from running, but for some reason, I felt like it was sure to chase me, like a cat would chase down a mouse. The walk back felt like an eternity of looking over my shoulder, thinking I would see that thing running at me on all fours. I was halfway up the hill when I looked back again and saw something that made my blood run cold in my veins. The ground was moving in multiple spots, as if something buried just beneath the surface was crawling out of the dirt. There must have been 5 or 10 spots like this. I stood there just long enough to confirm what I already knew. A single hand escaping the soil and clawing at the ground was all it took to send me sprinting back towards the house. I didn't look back this time. Fear took over, and I was no longer worried about being chased or potentially caught by whatever creatures were digging their way out of hell and into my cornfield. I made it back to my house and exploded through the quaint white back door. My first thought was of my pregnant wife, so I started yelling for her. After calling for Cindy a 3rd time, she answered, as she came down the wooden staircase that squeaked with her every step. She saw my panic, and fear flushed her face. "What's wrong, honey?" she said with worry in her voice. I thought about what I wanted to say for a moment, knowing I was about to sound crazy. "Honey, I need you to listen to what I'm about to tell you, and do your best to believe me." She just stared at me for a moment. "Okay." I proceeded into a rambling mess about these things coming out of the cornfields. When I was finished, she just looked at me, pretty much like you would expect. She could tell I was truly terrified, so in the end, she said she believed me. I had my doubts, though. We left and spent the next few nights at our mother's house. We just told her we were having plumbing issues. Eventually, we had to return home. At least, that's what Cindy said. I was less certain. We pulled into our gravel driveway, the house looming tall over the fields. Everything was quiet, but I knew the fields held dark secrets. That evening was pretty normal. My wife didn't seem too bothered, though. I figured this was a pretty good sign that she just thought I was crazy. The next morning, I drove straight to town, to the nearest gun store. I liked firearms, but never was really in a financial position to buy one. I didn't care at this point. I needed to make sure my family was safe. There was no guarantee a gun would even be effective, but I didn't know what else to do. When I walked in the door with a brand new shotgun, Cindy was instantly angry, and I tried to explain to her that it was for our protection. But even as the words were leaving my mouth, I could tell they didn't have the desired effect. I walked back outside, defeated. I hated that she was upset. But she didn't see what I saw out there in the fields. I took the gun and walked around for a bit. I don't know what I was trying to achieve, but it made me feel better to think I was doing something. Nothing happened, and darkness had fallen over my farm. Buying a gun made me feel more safe, but something about being outside at night gave me this magnetic pull towards my house, as if every cell in my body was screaming at me to go inside where it was safe. As I stood on the top step to my porch, I took one more look over the cornfield. I couldn't see anything but the fog that had settled over the field. I couldn't imagine being out there, in low visibility, on a moonless night, surrounded by whatever those things were that I saw earlier. I made my way inside, where Cindy occupied herself making dinner. At first, things were quiet, but eventually conversation came and there was less tension in the air. We ate and went to sleep shortly after. Just before climbing into bed, I looked out my second-story window, over the rolling hills of barren cornfields. I saw nothing, and this was just as chilling as the creatures I'd seen just days before. Where did they go? And where did they come from? Better yet, what were they? I had no answers, and no way of finding answers. I lied down next to my wife, with a million questions swimming through my head. I looked to her, and she looked peaceful, lying next to me. I pushed the thoughts of monsters that came from the fields out of my mind, and went to sleep thinking of my family. That is, until I heard it. A loud, spiteful growl emanated from outside. It yanked me from my slumber, but my wife didn't seem to notice. Everything was fuzzy at first, the way things are when you awake quickly. After a few seconds, I thought I might have dreamt it. That is, until I heard a bang come from downstairs. I couldn't be sure, but it sounded like someone hit the back door forcefully. I woke my wife, once again babbling about monsters. She disregarded me with sleepy spite until the second sound resonated throughout the house. Another bang. She shot up in bed, instantly more awake than I had been. The anger on her face from being disturbed melted into fear as she looked at me. That look is all it took for me to launch myself out of bed and grab my shotgun from the closet. "What are you going to do?" Cindy asked. "I'm going to check things out. Stay here and call for help." She picked up her phone, now almost in tears. "Be careful," she begged. I looked at her one last time before going downstairs. After shutting the bedroom door behind me, I was standing in the hallway above the staircase. Light spilled in from somewhere downstairs. I made my way around the railing, looking down at the aged staircase. Moonlight came in through the glass panes on the back door. We never took the time to take down the decorations from the walls, so as I descended the stairs, pictures older than myself eyed me with curiosity. Once at the bottom of the staircase, I started looking through each room until I came to the kitchen. That's when I saw the state the porch door was in. The glass was cracked, and when I opened it, I saw deep scratches down its length. Indecision plagued me. I was filled with white-hot rage at these creatures. I wanted them dead. I wanted to kill every last one of them. How dare they mess with my family? But fear held me in place. A smarter, maybe more primal part of my brain told me not to go outside. It told me to just go back upstairs and wait for the police. I wish I had listened to that part of me. After pushing my fear into a dense knot in my stomach, I marched out into the night. It took a few minutes of walking towards the cornfields before reality hit me. My confidence faded, and soon I realized I was several hundred yards away from my house, surrounded by the very darkness I had earlier loathed. Fog pulled at my feet in swirls. It wasn't very thick, but danced around me with a life of its own. At that moment, I heard something. Movement. Something was moving in the darkness around me, and I wish I hadn't looked for it. Maybe if I just turned back and went home, I wouldn't have had to see it. I spun back towards the fields to face the monster I knew awaited me, but I was painfully unprepared for what I saw. I don't think I'm capable of putting into words what the creature looked like beyond my earlier description. Even if I could, that image isn't something I wished upon anyone. I no longer think they are creatures born of nightmares, because no human could dream of something so damned. I personally believe they are straight from hell, brought to this world by God knows what. It crouched on all fours, staring at me with a face twisted into an expression of hatred. It hated me for the life I had, life that it envied. I don't know what it planned to do, but I didn't want to find out. I raised my gun to the thing and fired into the night. The muzzle flash was bright, and the illumination mitigated my night vision. Suddenly, I was unable to see more than a few feet in front of me. Damn it, I thought. How stupid. I couldn't tell if I had hit it or not. For all I knew, the gunfire could have attracted more of them to me, and I wouldn't know about their presence until it was too late. I turned and sprinted for the house just seconds after I took the shot, my ears still ringing. I couldn't tell if I was being chased or not. I figured it didn't matter anyways. I made it back to the house, slamming the door in my wake. I quickly went up the stairs to the bedroom, where my wife sat in tears on the bed. I shut and locked the door. She was still on the phone, but instead of a 911 operator sending out officers, an older gentleman spoke steadily on the other end of the line. She put him on so I could hear him better. The DeLay's place is old. It's been unchanged for generations. The land there is considered tainted, I guess. The miles of farmland are there simply to prevent the area from being developed. Keeping the land in the family has prevented others from moving to the area and discovering its secrets. Evil things are said to stalk the plains of Texas, but the only evil I've truly seen comes from those fields a while after the fall harvest in October, and walks the earth every night until the first frost in November. You would do good not to go outside between dusk and dawn. They don't seem too keen on daylight. I wish you kids the best luck. You're going to need it. What the hell was that? I asked Cindy. I called 911, but when I gave the operator our address, she forwarded my call to him. He said he knew the DeLays, your grandparents. He has a small farm on the other side of the fields, but most of the property was left to you. I thought about everything that had just happened. It seemed impossible. But I had already come face to face with the impossible in my backyard. Just then, a screech cut through the air, shattering the silence that had fallen over the room. I looked out the window, as I had done earlier in the evening before bed. What I saw will stay with me forever. One of those wretched things crawled on all fours to the edge of the field. Its head snapped in my direction at once and looked up at me with glowing eyes. I knew it could see me. It knew exactly where I was. Its eyes still full of hatred. It let loose a ear-splitting scream, a sound full of torment and anguish. Suddenly, dozens of others joined in, creating a cacophony of tortured wails. We didn't sleep at all that night. I sat with the shotgun, aimed at the door until the sun rose. The next day, Cindy and I barely spoke. I knew what she was thinking. Neither of us wanted to stay here, but we didn't exactly have the means to leave. Plus, what about what the old farmer had said? As long as we owned the land, it would remain a field of corn, as opposed to developing into a potential neighborhood where people would move and be plagued by the evil that marked this place. I think that's why we decided to stay, despite the things that come with fall. My name is Kevin, and I am 16 years old. Life was pretty normal for my family. We lived in a nice neighborhood that was getting ready for Halloween. People carved pumpkins and put out spooky decorations. It was my favorite time of the year. Then, on October 31st, came an emergency broadcast that the TV put out that morning. It hasn't stopped playing since. It went something like this. The president has declared a state of national emergency. All citizens are advised to shelter in their homes from sunset to sunrise on October 31st, Halloween night. Be prepared with whatever supplies necessary to stay in your home all night. It is advisable to purchase a firearm if you do not already own one. Do not go outdoors. Shelter in a central part of your home, away from all windows. This message played on a loop on the TV and was broadcasted on our phones occasionally. I was asleep, blissfully unaware of the panic the town had been cast into, when my father woke me. He told me we were going to make a run to the store for the things we would need. He left my bedroom without explanation, but I could tell something was wrong. I got dressed quickly and ran downstairs, where I saw the broadcast blaring on the TV. Fear rose in my chest. Why did we have to shelter inside? And why did they want us to be armed? My father had a hunting rifle, but I'd only seen him take it out once. That's when my mother chimed in. "Kids, let's go." My family loaded into the car in a state of shock. Well, at least I was in shock. My younger brother and sister were old enough to understand what was going on, but not really old enough to care. My anxiety reached its peak when we made it in town. People had gone mad. Shoppers raced to empty the shelves of canned goods and water. By the time we had made it to the store, it was mostly barren. We were able to get some water and food items that were less desirable. On the way home, my father stopped at a small gun store. It too was overran, but after almost an hour, my dad came out with a small black box. By the time we made it home, it was late afternoon. The neighborhood had been transformed. It more resembled something out of a movie than the place I had grown up. Many of the houses had boards across the windows, and people scurried about, taking supplies into their homes. My family unloaded the van as my mother rushed all of us inside. The TV still played that broadcast on repeat. As it played, I gave it some more thought. What did everyone think was going to happen? All this panic, and no one had even identified a threat. We simply feared because we were told to be afraid. I was starting to think the whole thing was an elaborate prank. My parents didn't look like they felt the same, however. My mom was filling all the sinks and bathtubs with water, while my dad boarded up as many windows as he could with what little wood he could scrounge up. It was crazy how fast everything had changed. Just a few hours before, I was resting peacefully in my bed. Everyone kept up at this pace. Meanwhile, I was supposed to be watching my siblings. Afternoon faded to evening, and with it came an unsettling quiet. The neighborhood had fallen silent. Darkness descended upon everything as the last wisps of sunlight spilled over rooftops. Shadows began to grow across yards and up and down the streets. Everyone was hiding in their homes. And from what? Decorations still hung where they were supposed to celebrate Halloween. Instead, they made the scene even more sinister as the skeletons lay on lawns and ghosts swayed from trees. My parents had made us retreat upstairs, where they stashed all of our supplies for the night. I peered out my window as darkness slowly engulfed everything. It was an abnormally dark night. Few lights remained on. The ones that did created pools of light that stood like islands in the inky black sea of night. Suddenly, I saw movement down the street. At first, I wasn't certain I had seen anything at all. Then, more movement. Something was definitely in the road. But what? I kept a watch from my second-story vantage point. It was coming closer, seeming to make its way towards the cul-de-sac where my house stood. I couldn't see it well in the darkness, but one of the houses it was nearing had a floodlight on over the garage. The light mostly died out in the driveway, but enough spilled into the street that I could certainly see a figure moving now. It was low to the ground, like it was moving on all four limbs. I say limbs because it didn't have a human shape. Could it be a dog? It passed to the dim rays of light and returned to an ocean of black. I lost sight of the thing. I tried to tell myself that it was probably a dog, but it didn't look quite right. I couldn't be certain, but for a second I could swear I saw its legs, bent in irregular directions, like that of an arachnid. Also, it didn't have that little trot that dogs do. Instead, it moved slowly, and with great deliberation. As I gazed out my window and watched the sparse pools of light, I noticed a thick fog settling over everything. Minutes flew past, as I watched the fog choke out the remaining illumination cast from the occasional light post. I looked out in horror, as my neighborhood was completely obstructed from sight. I ran to my parents' bedroom, where I rambled on about fog and some weird creature I'd seen. My father had his rifle leaning against the wall, obviously loaded. He looked nervous, as did my mother. Just then, we heard something. A subtle scratching came from downstairs. My mother gathered up the kids, as my father went to investigate. He made his way down the stairs, just approaching the bottom when the house was plunged into darkness. Everyone shrieked and my mom yelled at my dad to come back. "I'm fine," he said in response as he flicked on his phone for light. "I don't have any service though. Do you?" "No," my mother responded. "I'm going to see if the neighbors have any power," he said as he peeled back the curtains. "The whole neighborhood is out, even the light poles," was the last thing my father ever said to me. At that moment, two arms burst through the glass. I use the word arms loosely, as they were not human. Pitch black limbs wrapped around my father, as a short scream left his chest. He didn't have time for much else. The limbs had multiple joints and seemed to bend in impossible directions. Slowly, my dad was ripped out of the window, right in front of me. I wish it had happened like in the movies, where someone is just sucked out. My father was not so lucky. The window didn't fully break, so when he was drug out, his abdomen, arms, and legs got caught on jagged pieces of glass that acted like razor blades, cutting deep into his flesh as he was pulled out the window over the course of an eternity. I stood there in horror and disbelief. The sight was so painful my brain just couldn't process it. My mind was reeling, already making up alternate explanations for what I just witnessed. Anything not to accept what I just saw. My mother grabbed me by my arm and yanked me into her bedroom. My siblings were crying, but even in my dazed state, I knew they were shielded from what had happened, unable to see the pool of blood in front of the window were the chunks of flesh that still clung to jagged glass. My mom slammed the door shut. She did her best to keep the kids quiet. I wish she had done a better job. Before long, we could hear something downstairs. I say something because it didn't sound like the footsteps of any human or any creature I had ever heard of. Whatever was in the house was heavy, and it moved slowly about. It was searching from room to room, and finally it made its way to the staircase. One step at a time, we listened in horror as it made its ascent. Whatever it was might not have been bipedal, but it was hard to tell just by listening. Without hesitation, it crept to the bedroom door. Silence fell as it stood on the other side. I don't know what I expected. A growl, a snort as it smelled the air, something. Even it slamming its body weight into the door as it tried to break it down. What I didn't expect was to hear my father's voice say, "Open the door, honey. I just want to see the kids." I woke up like any other Friday, at 6 a.m. when my new puppy needed to go outside. My girlfriend was still asleep in bed, so I crept to the back door as not to wake her. We lived together in a modest 2-bedroom house in Colorado. I hated these early morning bathroom trips since it was December and absolutely freezing. Sometimes I had to shovel snow just so my little Rottweiler puppy had a place to go to the bathroom outside. As much as I hated it, I always resigned to my fate of standing out in the frigid early morning air as the wind cuts through the jacket I barely threw on. I crept from the bedroom to where my puppy's crate was, in the living room. His name was Cyrus, and the cage kept him out of trouble throughout the night. It also protected him from the cats, who haven't taken kindly to him yet, and since he was just a puppy, he could barely defend himself. My cats were named Black and White Kitty for obvious reasons. They usually sat on the back of my couch when they weren't coming to bed with me for warmth, but they were nowhere to be seen this morning. That isn't unusual for cats, though, the way they stalk around their homes and all. I bent down to pick Cyrus up out of his crate. He was acting strange, though. When I opened the door, he usually came rushing out, excited to once again be able to chew on everything except for his toys. This time, however, he sat in the back corner of his crate. His crying had woken me up, and as I stood here trying to coax him out, he refused to budge and kept whimpering lowly. At first I was a little worried, but I decided that one of the cats probably just scared him or something like that. I reached in and picked him up. Despite his squirming, I was able to get him out pretty easily. I carried him through the kitchen and out the back door, where we usually take him to the bathroom. I set him down on a fresh layer of snow that had accumulated overnight. It was less than an inch thick, so he was able to manage. He wouldn't leave from between my legs, though. Whenever I would step, he would jump under me as if he were hiding from something. I was starting to worry about him, but decided he might have just been cold and shrugged it off. I walked back to go inside, but he paused just before entering. Now I was weirded out. He always raced to get back inside, but this morning he was acting like he would rather be out in the cold. I looked at him for a moment and he whimpered as if in response. I decided to scoop him up and go inside with him in my arms. That's where things got really weird. One of my cats shambled over to me. I say shambled because it walked as if it had been hurt and was using all of its remaining energy just to move. I set Cyrus down and he scampered off. I noted this, but turned my attention to my cat. Something about him didn't look right. I turned the kitchen light on to get a better look. When I did, I was horrified and confused all at once. This thing looked similar to my cat in its markings and size, but looked wrong. Like someone had taken a picture of my cat and it came out slightly disfigured. I can't quite explain it. It just looked like someone made a stuffed animal that looked like a cat, but it didn't come out exactly right. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid more from the confusion and the unexplainable than the thing itself. It is just a cat, right? It can't really hurt me. But was this my cat? And if it was, what had happened to it? I decided I was being silly, and I knelt down to see if he was okay. When I did, the thing freaked out and started biting and clawing at me. I'd barely made contact with it when I jumped back, but it kept coming at me. I feel ashamed to say that I ran from a cat. You would do the same thing if you had looked into his eyes. I wasn't running from it because it became aggressive. I was running because it had two pupils, one right on top of the other. I know what you're saying, and no, it wasn't a trick of the light or a birthmark. What made it worse was the fact that cats have vertical pupils like slits that let in the light. This thing had two perfectly round ones in each eye. I ran into the front room and frantically searched for my puppy. The thing in the kitchen didn't pursue me much further, but I could hear it growling in a low, hateful tone. Cyrus wasn't in his crate or anywhere to be seen, so I assumed he had run to my room. I looked back at the doorway to the kitchen again. I couldn't see where the thing had went, but I could still hear it. I took off towards my room and burst through the door, slamming it behind me. My girlfriend sat awake on my bed with a nightstand lamp on. "What's going on, babe? Is something wrong?" "Yes," I said as I turned to her. "There is some thing in the house and I don't know what it is." That's all I could say before I froze. In bed with my girlfriend was something that resembled my dog. The small thing sat at the bottom, away from Brooke. I immediately saw its warped figure and its eyes. They looked just like whatever that thing was in the kitchen. "Brooke," I said, "I need you to get out of bed and come to me." "Why? Tell me what's going on." "That thing at the bottom of the bed isn't our dog," I said to her. She looked at me confused, then looked back at the creature. It started emitting a low growl. She inhaled sharply and jumped up. She ran to me, and I stood between her and that abomination. I don't know what happened to Cyrus, or if that was what was left of him after something. I don't know what happened to him. Either way, I felt terrible for him. "We need to get the keys and make a break for the car," I said. She agreed quietly. The keys were somewhere in the kitchen, hanging up. Brooke turned the knob to the bedroom door, and, almost as if seeing we were about to escape, the thing on my bed lunged at us. I ripped the door open and shoved Brooke into the hallway. We went charging towards the kitchen, together, as I shut the door behind me. Right before we stepped into the kitchen, however, Brooke slid to a halt. Almost running into her, I caught myself on the doorframe. I wish I was able to wonder as to what had stopped her dead in her tracks, but I had a pretty good idea. I looked over her shoulder to see two of the things, each physically resembling my cats, standing in the kitchen, growling, and, worst of all, walking towards us. Their bodies were even more hideous in the light. Their joints looked as if they had all been pulled from their sockets, and their legs were all slightly different lengths. They moved the way a dead animal would move, if it had been reanimated somehow, driven by some force that made it look like a morbid puppet. "Run," I said to Brooke. "Run to the car. I'll be right behind you." She turned and sprinted for the door. At the same time, I ran past the creatures and grabbed the keys off the wall. I barely cleared them as they launched themselves at me. I wasn't sure what would happen if they bit me. I wouldn't have been so lucky, but their disproportionate bodies and irregular legs made their jump awkward, and they both fell short. It took them just a second to recover, but I was already in full sprint through the back door. I tore it open and tried to slam it behind me. but one of those things made its way about halfway out. As the door shut forcefully on its small body, I heard a sick crunch. It's a sound I'll never forget, as I could almost feel the bones breaking under the skin. I looked down, and to my horror, its ribs had been broken, and some had even penetrated its abdomen as they were forced down as they broke. Despite this, the thing still clawed at me and tried to bite. My face ran flush as I felt the contents of my stomach start to come up. This had to be a dream, right? This just wasn't possible. I was snapped out of it when the second creature ran into the door. The growls that came from the other side were different now. It sounded more like 1,000 voices all at once. Hearing this, I bolted for the car, so Brooke and I could get the hell out of there, so I never had to see those things again. I ran through the snow, my feet already numb from the cold, and made my way through the gate. Brooke was waiting by the car. The poor thing was probably froze half to death. I unlocked it and we both jumped inside. As I turned the key, the car sputtered for a moment from the cold. Damn it, I thought, just as the engine roared to life. And we sped away. Not much was said as we drove. I think we were both in shock. We didn't know where to go either. We made our way to town, traveling faster than one should on the snowy back roads. The snow was still falling, and the sun was yet to break through the clouds that loomed over the mountains most mornings. I don't know what happened. I could possibly convince myself that it had been a bad dream if it weren't for Brooke. She was relatively silent in the passenger seat. I looked over at her to see if she was okay, only to see silent tears making their way down her face. I hated that. I wish I could take away whatever pain or fear she was feeling and take it onto myself. I looked back at the road just in time to see an animal standing there. A deer. Eyes locked on the headlights of my car. I wasn't going to swerve off the road for a deer, but I did try to avoid hitting it. I braked and tried to go around it, but the icy roads had other plans. I started to slide sideways as the car made its way to the snowbanks that lined the sides. Brooke grabbed her seatbelt and let out a terrified shriek. It seemed like less than a second before the car jolted to a stop in the snow. I tried to regain control of the vehicle, but it obviously hadn't worked. The wreck wasn't bad, and under normal conditions, we could simply be pulled from the snow and be on our way. I checked to see that Brooke was okay, and she nodded. I thought to myself for a moment. We weren't far from town by car, but it was a hike through the snow and the back roads on foot, and we had run out of the house without grabbing so much as shoes. We couldn't call for help either, as neither of us grabbed a phone. We would have to stay and wait for morning. It wasn't far off, and the car was still running, so we would stay warm. That's when we heard it. A gut-wrenching sound. It was a sickening growl, low and deep. No animal I had ever heard made a sound like this. Part of me already knew what it was. There, Brooke whispered softly, terror in her voice. I looked to where she gestured, and what I saw nearly broke me. I would call it a deer, but it was too mangled. It stood on legs that were bent in impossible directions, and walked into the pool of light emitted by the headlights. With each step, it looked like it would collapse. It never did, though. It's still circling the car, growling, and getting closer. I'm writing this as a record of what happened if help doesn't come in time. I don't know what this thing wants to do to us, or what it is capable of. But I can now hear the popping of what sounds like broken bones grinding against each other as it is drawing closer and closer to the car. I really hope the sun comes up soon. For as long as I can remember, my little sister Rachel had always been extremely shy and timid. She stands a whole 5'2", with long curly brown hair, and she's so light I'm afraid she'll drift off into the wind. Growing up, it was always just the two of us, and I'm a proud big brother. While my parents were working to make ends meet, I was a young boy, taking care of a sister half his age. It never bothered me, not for 1 minute. I vowed I would always be there for her when she needed me. It was always just the two of us, but time went on and I had to start living my own life. I dreaded breaking the news to her that I was going off to college. Hell, I even thought about not going at all and just working somewhere. But I needed to live. I started to regret always being there for her, having just the two of us against the world, since she never got out of her shell to make her own friends. She bawled her eyes out when I finally went off to college, but we talked every day. I was still going to be there for her, even though we were apart. Then, more time passed, and I was working a great job, and engaged to an amazing woman who gets along with my parents and adores my little sister. Things were going well, and I wished that things would go well for Rachel. But when she said she was going off to college, I couldn't help it. I worried about her. Rachel has never had any friends, at all, which is fine, but when she announced to the family that she just got accepted to an amazing college in another state, I was worried that she would be eaten alive. She's just so painfully shy that a sudden noise would probably give her a heart attack. Then again, maybe she's different. Maybe I'm just worrying too much. Rachel is an adult. She doesn't need me to hold her hand. When the time came for her to head off to her new college life, she had video called me to tell me that she was all packed and ready to head out. She was actually smiling ear to ear. I've never seen her so excited before. That really put my heart at ease, and I told her to have a safe trip. Her university was a few hours away, and I insisted she take frequent breaks, follow the speed limit, and have her seatbelt on. She laughed as she assured me that everything was going to be okay. That night, Rachel had called me to tell me she was already settled into her dorm. I spent most of the day worrying, but I'm glad she made it okay. She had sent me a selfie of her with her new dorm mate, Madison. Rachel had been telling me all about her, and how they had been texting since they found out about their dorms. She was so excited to finally have a friend. Madison seemed really nice. She was a bit taller than Rachel, and she has short, straight black hair, and is usually seen wearing all black. Your typical goth girl. But they seemed to get along great. Days turned into weeks as time flew by. Finally, October came. Rachel still texted me whenever she had a chance. One day she messaged me that she was going to a Halloween party with Madison. I didn't really think much of it. If anything, I was excited for her. I've been so nervous about her adjusting. But she seems to finally have broken out of that cocoon of shyness. I told her to have fun and stay away from boys. She responded with a shocked face emoji. My night's activities were pretty tame. My fiance works nights as a nurse, so I was at home alone watching horror movies and passing out candy to trick-or-treaters. It was around 9 p.m. when I ran out of candy, so I turned off the porch light and locked up, eager to finish up this movie about a certain hockey-masked killer. My phone started to buzz. When I looked at it, I saw it was an image from Rachel. She had sent me a selfie of her and Madison. They both were dressed up as, I guess they were witches or something. She sent me a message that said, "First college party," and I couldn't help but laugh at her awkwardness. I've never been around her university, so I'm not sure where they were, but the building looked old and decrepit. I asked her where the party was, and she told me it was at an old dorm. That really threw me off. I asked her to give me some more details. Rachel told me that Madison had a bunch of friends, and they were actually going to sneak into the building and have a few drinks there. I couldn't believe it. Now I started to worry again. But she's an adult. I should let her live her life, so I refrained from giving her a lecture. I just told her to have fun and be careful. Also to let me know if she gets arrested, because our parents would have a heart attack if she did. A few minutes passed, and I decided to give her university a quick search online. Not because I was nervous, but I was just curious. After going through some message boards, I found rumors that the dorm was shut down a few years ago due to a fire. Apparently, a student had set the place ablaze one night. The stories online said the student had a few altercations with others in the dorm, and one night, out of pure rage, they covered the place and people in gasoline and set them on fire. I shuddered after that. Perhaps it was just the movies I was watching, but reading that sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't believe I was letting some ghost stories online scare me. So I switched the TV off and got on YouTube to watch some wholesome, funny videos. A few videos in, and I got another notification on my phone. It was another image from Rachel. This time it was a photo of a red Solo cup filled with beer, with another message saying, "First beer in college." This made me laugh and cringe, but as I looked at the photo, I saw something else. In the photo, it was her outstretched hand holding a cup of beer. The flash was on, and it showed that she was facing a dark hallway, I assume where the dorm rooms were at. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, but peering from one of the open dorm rooms, I thought I saw someone's face. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the photo again, but it was gone. I shrugged it off and just told her not to drink too much. I figured that I must have been tired, so I crashed onto my bed, but I couldn't get the image of that face out of my mind. It was so skinny and gray. It had patches of black hair sitting on its head as it peered out of the doorway. It was grinning. I shook the image out of my head, right as I heard my phone go off again. This time it was a selfie with Rachel and Madison. They were holding up red Solos cups in a cheers gesture, and she sent me another message saying, "Here's to my new friends." I was confused, as it was just her and Madison, until I saw that face again. It was shrouded in the darkness, staring at them, at her. I didn't know what was going on, but I decided to call her. After a few rings, she finally responded. She was shouting a bit. There was some loud rock music playing in the background. She asked if everything was okay, but I was the one that should be asking that. She was telling me how good of a time she was having, but it didn't sound right. The way she was talking was extremely slurred and slow. Was she drunk? I thought to myself. I heard something shift and another voice was on the line. It was Madison. Madison assured me that everything is okay and that she's been taken care of. But the way she said it unsettled me. It sounded so sinister. There was silence. She must have hung up on me. I sat there and stared at my phone. Was Rachel in trouble? Should I call the police or something? But what would I tell them? The cops wouldn't even give me the time of day if I told them that I was seeing creepy things in the pictures my sister was sending me. I slumped back onto my head, staring at the screen of my phone, when it began to light up. Another message from Rachel, except this time, it was a video. The video was of her dancing, but there was no music playing. I could hear laughing, but it was low, and it sounded like they were inhaling instead of exhaling, as if whatever was laughing was poorly imitating the sound of someone doing so. The video was only 30 seconds long, but as she danced in silence, it cut off right when something emerged from the darkness. I freaked out. I started to call her again. No answer. So I continued to call, to no avail. That was when my phone started to ring. It was Rachel, and it was a video call. I accepted it and saw Rachel walking down a dark hallway. She was holding something. Holding something's hand. It was leading her deeper into the darkness, and I could hear its light footfall, like a wet thud hitting the ground. I called out to her, and what responded were whispers. The whispers were dozens upon dozens of different tones, a chorus of dissonant pained voices emanating from the abyss of blackness as she stepped into it more and more. Whatever was leading her stopped and looked towards the phone. It was a monster, a demon of some kind, an abomination. It was the face I saw earlier, but it wasn't just one body. As the light from the phone slightly illuminated the creature, I saw that it was a body made of other bodies, bits of flesh and bone jutting out. Its skin wriggled, and I noticed that its skin was countless fingers and toes all writhing together. The creature's body was shifting with each second, revealing mouths and ears and eyes. The whispers were coming from it, the sound of fear and pain coming from this damned amalgamation. I saw that Rachel was holding a hand that was attached to it, and from the hand, countless fingers stretched onto her, wrapping around her arms like fleshy tendrils. Rachel was completely silent as she followed the creature. I cried out to her. I begged her to stop and run away, but nothing. They stepped into a dorm room that was completely blackened and burned. Rachel stood in the middle of the room, in front of the monster. Its body began to shift again, and parts of its body began to open, small slits in its skin revealing dozens and dozens of mouths, each open wide to show sharp, blackened teeth. I heard Madison's voice. She was sobbing and apologizing. I shouted at her, asked her what was going on, and all she could say was, "I called it to help me stop the bullying, but it won't stop now. It needs food. It needs to eat. Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. I yelled. I cried as I saw the creature embrace Rachel. In its embrace, I heard blood spatter and flesh tear as each of the mouths began to bite into her, eating her. Rachel finally came to, and God, I wish that she didn't. She let out a blood-curdling shriek as she tried to resist the creature. The monster tightened its hold on her, and more of the mouths began to feast upon my baby sister. I couldn't watch anymore. I hung up and called the police, telling them everything. I knew I sounded crazy, but they had to go and save my little sister. I couldn't go to sleep. I was so worried. I rushed into the bathroom and vomited. The image of what happened burned into my memory forever. A few hours later, the police called me and told me there was nothing there. Weeks went by and there was nothing. Nothing found or nothing left of her. I gave the police my phone, and they investigated the photos. Unfortunately, they had no data on the video call. I told the cops to look into her dorm mate, Madison. The school said that there was no record of anyone named Madison, but they did say that a girl named Lisa was supposed to be her dorm mate, but she had disappeared. After doing some more research, I ended up finding a picture of Madison. She was the girl that had set fire to the dorms years before. Was she setting fire to her bullies? No. I think she was trying to get rid of whatever that thing was, that abomination, that fusion of tortured souls that it's eaten. My stomach churns as I remember it. My parents are still spending money in search of her. They are full of hope. but I know there's nothing left of her. Not one scrap. My name is Seth, and I'm just a normal guy. I don't know if I will survive to see the end of my shift, so I am typing this on my phone as a warning to all who read it. I got a job as a night shift guard at a local museum. I won't name it to keep the thrill seekers and paranormal explorers from suffering my fate. But if you find yourself in a similar job position, and you get a weird set of rules, follow them. Memorize the rules and follow them to a T. Let me start from the beginning. Being a young guy in college, I was looking for an easy paycheck to make ends meet. I wasn't job searching for long when I found an ad for a night watchman on the internet. The list of duties basically included doing a perimeter check every hour and watching some cameras from 10 when the last of the day staff left until 7 when they returned. Since I took day classes, I almost scrolled right past it until I saw the pay. I'm ashamed to say $23 an hour was enough for me to abandon any hope of having a normal sleep schedule. I filled out the online application and went to bed that night, still thinking about the job. I only had class 3 days a week, so I figured I could work 3 nights a week on days that I don't have class, and still have 1 day off. I also thought about how odd the pay was. But who was I to judge how wages were set? I wasn't even college educated yet. The next morning I awoke to an exciting email that basically said I had the job after a brief in-person interview. It listed a time for later that day and a number in case I had to reschedule. I couldn't believe my luck. Landing a job with this kind of pay officially made me a high roller for my friend group. I was prompt for the interview. Not knowing how to dress, I just wore khakis and a polo. Despite feeling a little awkward, everything went well, and I got the job. A gray-haired man in his 50s told me I could start immediately, as long as I was able to learn quickly and could read and understand all of the rules by the weekend. He sent me home with a manual and told me my first shift was Friday. He said I could wear jeans or khakis, as long as I wore the black and white security t-shirt they provided. Everything seemed to be falling into place. I thought, oh, how I was wrong. When I got home, I cracked open the employee handbook and started to read through it. It was just a couple pages enclosed in a paperback binder, so it was a quick read. Most of it was your standard stuff, until I got to the last page. Rules, it read at the top. I started reading down the page. Rule 1. When you first get to the security office, make sure to log into the monitor and check every camera. If you see a man staring into any of the cameras, do not go to that portion of the building for the night. Rule 2. Grab your keys and make sure to count how many there are at the start of every shift. The number doesn't matter, just make sure you remember how many. Rule 3. On each round you take, make sure the gate to the courtyard is closed. If it is open, and you did not open it, sprint back into the building and do not go outside until sunrise. They are loose. Rule 4. If the gate is normal, walk through the courtyard to the back of the building. When you get there, the lights might go out as you walk along the back. If they do, close your eyes and stand motionless until they turn back on. Rule 3. If you open your eyes, attempt to return to the security room as quickly as possible and remain there for the rest of the night. Rule 5. When you return from your round of the outside perimeter, you may find someone else in the security office. Have a polite conversation with them and resume watching the cameras. Do not give the stranger any personal information, such as your name. Rule 6. When you make your round through the interior of the building, make sure to bring the handgun provided in the top drawer of your desk. You might need it. Rule 7. Walk up the stairs and check each of the exhibits. If any of them are missing, or not where they should be, run back to the security office and radio a 1023. If you are chased, you may resort to using the handgun, but this is a last resort only. Rule 8. Repeat rules 1 through 7 every hour until the end of your shift. Rule 9. As a last resort, call 911 and say it's an emergency. You have a 1023. If help does not arrive within the next 15 minutes, you are on your own. Great, I thought. I knew this job was too good to be true. I was just part of some elaborate prank. I sighed and tossed the rulebook onto my desk, defeated. My first shift was supposed to be tomorrow, but at this point I doubted there was really a position open. I guess it couldn't hurt to show up anyway. Aside from looking silly, it really won't cost me anything. Maybe the rules were just a prank of the new guy, I convinced myself. With that hopeful thought, I applied to a few more places just in case, and went to bed. The next evening I arrived for my first shift, just a few minutes early. When I arrived to the museum, there was just one person there, the security guard I was relieving. "Ah, you must be the new guy," he said. Yeah, this is my first shift," I responded. My mind wandered to the weird rules I had found. I wondered if he knew anything about them. "My name is Thomas. I've been here for a few years now. Never on night shift, though. The security office is to their left when you walk in the main entrance. Everything you should need for the night is in there." He turned and started to walk out. "Oh, and one more thing. Make sure you follow the rules," he said over his shoulder. He power walked out the main doors without looking back, obviously in a hurry to get the hell out of there. I was shocked into silence. Followed the rules. Does that mean this list was serious? Maybe there are perfectly rational explanations for all of them. I tried to convince myself of that. Despite trying, something in my brain told me that it wasn't true, like the voice I thought to myself in was being whispered to by something deeper and more primal. I turned around to face the museum. The entrance was to my back, and to my front, a large room, with the staircase that wrapped up the middle. The ceiling had skylights, probably 100 or so feet in the air. To my right, the admissions desk, and all around me hung different models of dinosaurs and charts showing facts of natural science. I hung a left and made my way to the security office. It wasn't far from the main entrance. A large steel door stood in a reinforced door frame. At least it doesn't look like anyone will be able to get in here, I thought to myself. I entered the office and started to familiarize myself with everything. I still had a few minutes until my shift officially started. The room was rectangular, with a long desk against the far wall. To be honest, it was more of a closet, just enough room to walk between the desk and the wall. At one end, the door, and just a few steps to the other end, several monitors displayed the security feeds. It was at that moment that something hit me. Rule 6. When you make your rounds through the interior of the building, make sure to bring the handgun provided in the top drawer of your desk. You might need it. The thought crept over me like a cold chill. If there really is a handgun in this drawer, I thought to myself, then the chances of this being a joke are slim. Like I said earlier, part of me already knew what I would find. Sure enough, I opened the desk drawer to find what looked like a revolver resting atop some papers. My heart sank as I realized my fate was sealed. The gravity of the situation hit me. My life would be in danger if I did not follow the rules. I checked my watch with haste. 10 o'clock sharp. I instantly thought about Rule 1. When you first get to the security office, make sure to log in to the monitor and check every camera. If you see a man staring into any of the cameras, do not go to that portion of the building for the night. My heart rate increasing, I looked into the monitors and studied each screen carefully. To my horror, I saw something. Screen 6 showed a room with some kind of intricate bug exhibit. Standing in the corner, the silhouette of a tall man. The cameras were in night mode, as many of the lights were off. This made everything pretty much either a shade of gray, black, or white. For this reason, I couldn't tell if the man was actually wearing all black, or if he just appeared that way. Even with the low quality, I could make out a horrifying truth. He was tall and impossibly thin. His arms hung at his sides, lower than they should have, disappearing into the shadows. Oh, and his face. It was so pale. This could have just been a trick of the light, but it seemed fuzzy, like his whole head was a white blur. I stared in disbelief. Just moments ago, I was certain the rules were real, but I was already having doubts. Just then, the man moved, taking a step forward and out of the shadows towards the camera. I jumped for some reason. The rules hadn't said anything about him moving. I picked up the handbook and looked for the page that had the contact information in case of emergencies. Finally, I had found the number of the night manager. He left before 10, but he was listed as an emergency contact. I started dialing furiously on my cell phone. After hitting call, I looked back to the monitors while the phone rang. I was shocked to see the man had taken another step. Someone picked up by the third ring.
Hello, Seth. I figured you would be calling me about this time.
Hearing him call me by name was weird and hard to comprehend. It was like a mental computer glitch. I started to wonder if I had gone crazy. Without me having to speak, he continued talking.
The man on the screen shouldn't bother you, as long as you stay out of that part of the museum. Just turn that camera off, and whatever you do, don't go to that exhibit. Understand?
Yeah, I replied, still unable to believe what I was hearing.
Good. Now, we will double your wages for the night. We understand it may take some time to adjust to such a line of work. Now, only call for help for something that is not in the rules. Call 911 from the office phone. You will be routed to an officer who deals with this sort of thing. Have a good night, Seth.
And with that, he hung up. I was starting to accept my situation for what it truly was. Plus, double my wages for the night meant some serious cash. I decided that as long as I followed the rules, everything should be just fine. Right? I don't have to understand what was going on here. Just survive it. I looked back to the camera, the man now halfway across the room. Even now that he was closer to the camera, his face was still a fuzzy blur. What was even more chilling was the way he appeared to be staring right at me. His head was tilted in the direction of the camera, and as I looked at him, my spine started to tingle, the way it does when someone is standing too close to you from behind. I whipped around, feeling a tangible presence. Nothing though. At that moment it hit me. Turn the monitor off, my boss had told me. Stupid. I had already forgotten the simple instructions. When I turned back to the screen, he was even closer. The hair on my arm rose. I quickly deactivated the camera, all the while feeling as if I was being watched. A feeling that left as soon as the screen went black. I leaned back in my chair, but my victory was short-lived. I still had a whole list of rules to follow. Rule 2. Grab your keys and make sure to count how many of them there are at the start of every shift. The number does not matter. Just make sure you remember how many. I looked at the desk. A large keychain set atop some papers. Stealing a glance at my watch, I noticed it was now 10:15. I hoped it wasn't already too late. I picked up the keys and started counting furiously. 23, 24, 25. The keychain was filled with keys, and I didn't know what any of them unlocked. 37. There were 37 keys on the ring. That wouldn't be so hard to remember, would it? I set them back on the desk, careful to do so quietly. I'm not sure why, but I felt I was safer the quieter I remained. Back to the rules. Rule 3. On each round you take, make sure the gate to the courtyard is closed. If it is open, sprint back into the building and do not go outside until sunrise. They are loose. I was supposed to make perimeter rounds at the turn of every hour. I was to start outside in the courtyard. It was surrounded by a tall cast iron fence with anti-climb spikes at the top. The odd thing about it was that they were facing the inside, as if to keep something in instead of out. There were 2 gates, one to the outside, and one to the part of the museum that was off limits, even to me. The rulebook wasn't clear about what was in it or why it was off limits. I spent several minutes looking. Despite this, the list of rules clearly outlined that I was to check this gate and run like hell if it was open. It was 10:40 now, 20 minutes until my first round. I took this time to go through the drawers and look over the remaining papers in the security station. The only other helpful thing I found was a large black flashlight. Cliché, I know. 10:55. I suppose it was time. I stood from my chair for the first time since I had gotten here. I grabbed the flashlight from the desk. The rules didn't mention it, but it couldn't hurt, I figured. I turned to leave when I remembered the keys. I had no clue what they opened, but I wasn't going to chance needing them and not having them. After snatching them up, I left the security office. The steel door shut with a heavy thud behind me. I was even more grateful for the protection it offered than when I had arrived. I started making my way through the museum. It was mostly dark, with the only lights coming from the LEDs that illuminated the exhibits. I walked down a long, dark hallway to the courtyard. The hallway had small office cubicles to the right and left, down its length. I thought it to be odd a museum would need this many administrators or whatnot, but what did I know? Finally, at the end of the hall, I looked out the glass door to a creepy sight. Darkness had fallen over the courtyard. Shadows crept all over, cast by the few light posts that glowed orange in the night. I stepped out into the crisp October air as the doors shut behind me. I was supposed to start here and finish my round at the back of the building, according to the manual. I slowly made my way down the sidewalk. The wind kicked up a flurry of leaves around my feet as I made forward progress. Rounding the corner, relief flooded over me. The gate was closed. Thank God. Feeling slightly better, I started walking again, just a little bit faster this time. At this point, I had made it to the back of the building. It was a straight shot to the rear door, between the fence and the walls of the museum. More floodlights dotted the walls, creating pools of illumination. The space between the lights, however, was abnormally dark. It seemed like the light just stopped, in perfect little oval shapes leading away from the building. On one side of a hair-thin line was a dim glow cast from buzzing bulbs. On the other, an unnatural blackness. I turned on the flashlight. It wasn't very bright. Something told me this wasn't the reason it failed to cut into the unnatural darkness. Let's get this over with, I thought to myself. I started speed walking down the alley. As soon as I stepped into the first pool of shadows, a cold chill ran down my spine, just as the hairs on my arms stood at end. The feeling of being watched had returned, tenfold. It was the type of feeling that seems to apply physical pressure to your body, as if you're being pushed along by some unknown force. Halfway there, I was almost back to safety. Well, relative safety. That's when the lights, my only beacons of hope, died out. I was suddenly cast into a void of nothingness. Everything was black. Not even light from the stars or other buildings was visible anymore. Rule 4. If the gate is normal, walk through the courtyard to the back of the building. When you get there, the lights might go out as you walk along the back. If they do, close your eyes and stand motionless until they turn back on. If you open your eyes, attempt to return to the security office as quickly as possible and remain there for the rest of the night. I shut my eyes. I thought I'd felt vulnerable before, but this was a million times worse. I felt not only like I was being watched, but I could swear that I felt something moving, just close enough to me that I could feel it disturb the air ever so slightly. That's when I heard it, that awful noise. Something was coming towards me, from the direction I had come. That wasn't the worst part, however. It sounded as if something was being dragged behind it on the concrete walkway. Something metallic, like some sort of tool or... I didn't really want to finish that thought. I didn't want to think of all the things it could be. As the sound drew closer, I contemplated running for the door. Every cell in my body screamed that I was in danger. Maybe I would have ran if it hadn't been for my experiences so far. It was now right behind me, still getting closer, still dragging the weapon it would probably kill me with. I closed my eyes, tighter, ready to be struck at any moment. All at once, right as it sounded like the thing would run right into me, the sound appeared to move past me and dissipate like a faint breeze. It felt as if a small gust of wind had struck me. Just then, the lights came back on, with a distinctive click. I opened my eyes, the light from the world now visible again. It's almost like for a few moments I had slipped into some other dimension, or at least got to experience it. I ran to the door and flung it open as I launched myself inside. I made my way through the darkened museum and back to the security office. I opened the heavy door and quickly stepped inside, almost running right into a person. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else there. Then it hit me. Rule 5. When you return from your round of the outside perimeter, you might find someone else in the security office. Have a polite conversation with them, and resume watching the cameras. Do not give the stranger any personal information, such as your name. The man was pretty old, gaunt with a mostly bald head. He was facing me, offering a warm smile. Why, hello there. My name is Charlie, and how are you this evening? I stammered for a moment, trying to wrap my head around the weirdness of this. I am well, Charlie. And yourself? Oh, I suppose I can't complain. Just have a quick question for you, then I'll be on my way. Nervous, he was about to ask me my name or something else personal. I hesitated, but eventually spoke. And what is that? I asked. He replied, the keys in your pocket. How many of them are there tonight? I have to make my rounds and need to make sure all the doors here stay closed. Wouldn't want anything getting out. Getting out? I thought to myself. What did he mean? What things would escape from a science museum? There were 37 keys on the ring. Something else hit me now. How did he know that they were in my pocket? Oh, looks like I have a busy night. Well, I'd better get going. I only have until 3 to make sure everything is locked up tight. They call that the witching hour for a reason, you know. I couldn't help myself. I just had to ask. What are you talking about, sir? His eyes hardened. The warm smile fell from his face. You'll know soon enough, kid. Can't live forever. Enjoy the time you have, because you'll miss it one day. He seemed irritated. Without saying anything else, he walked past me, out the door. Walking away, I could see him clearly from behind. God, how I wish I hadn't looked. My blood ran cold as ice when I saw the back of his head had been blown apart. I could see right into his skull cavity. Liquefied brain and soft tissue ran down the back of his neck and poured from jagged, irregular hole in his head. I backstepped into the room, letting the door slam shut behind me. We all have those shocking moments when we see things we weren't ready for, just like the first time seeing a horrific scene in a movie when you were a child. I don't know if I will ever recover from that. How could anyone be normal after having a conversation with someone who had put a bullet through their head? A conversation with a dead man, that is. I looked at the time. 11:33. I had to do a perimeter sweep of the building inside now. Rule 6. When you make your round through the interior of the building, make sure to bring the handgun provided in the top drawer of the desk. You might need it. Anything was better than thinking about what I had just experienced. I opened the drawer and took the gun, sliding it into my pocket. Very safe, I know. I grabbed the flashlight that was next to useless and began my rounds. Rule 7. Walk up the stairs and check each of the exhibits. If any of them are missing, or not where they should be, run back to the security office and radio at 1023. If you are chased, you may resort to using the handgun, but this is a last resort only. Great, I thought to myself. I made my way up the large, twisting staircase, figuring I would start at the top and work my way down. I started going room to room. Everything was mostly dark, only illuminated by display lights that stayed on all the time. I started to worry when I realized I didn't actually know what the displays were supposed to look like. How was I to know if they moved? I looked at an exhibit of some prehistoric creature and a recreation of some wooded biome. It appeared to be looking right at me, but that's the way they were probably made to look, right? I moved on from that room into a long hallway, made up of many aquariums and charts of fish. This room actually felt normal. It was interesting to look at the fish swim lazily through the water. That's when I heard something. I couldn't be sure, but it sounded like someone had whispered something. I stood silent, waiting to hear it again. I looked to the other end of the hall. Some of the exhibits play music or list off facts through a set of speakers. I walked to the end of the hall. It bled into a room full of insects. As I stepped into the room, I could swear I heard something now. It was definitely a whisper. The room was poorly lit, and I had that feeling of being watched again. I quickly raised my flashlight to look at my surroundings. When I did, my heart stopped. Right in front of me was the same bug display I had seen on the monitor earlier in the night, right where I had seen the man standing. I was in the exact spot he was when I shut the camera off. I slowly, with shaking hands, turned the flashlight to look around the room. To my horror, the weak beam of light fell upon a man, impossibly tall and horribly thin. His face was just as blurry as it was in the camera. It was no trick of the light this time. I ran, but it seemed to happen in slow motion. The only sound I could perceive was the wind in my ears as I ran back down the long hallway. I'm not going to call that thing that chased me a man after this point, as when I turned to see if it was gaining on me, I saw it on all fours, crawling at a speed no human could move at. Its arms and legs bent in every direction except where they were supposed to. I turned and focused only on running. It was the only thing that I could do. Should it catch up with me, then so be it. I just didn't want to see it coming. By some miracle, I made it to the security office. I thought about going straight out the front door, but I would never make it. It was gaining on me. I slammed the door behind me, locking the deadbolt. That thing slammed into the door not a second later. I had forgotten all about Rule 1. When you first get to the security office, make sure to log in to the monitor and check every camera. If you see a man staring into any of the cameras, do not go to that portion of the building for the night. That brings us to where I am now. That thing is still beating on the door, unrelenting. It can't be from this world, because with every assault the door gives a little more. That steel barrier will break down soon. The sounds the creature makes tell me it's straight from hell, and I know that it wants to drag me there itself. I radioed for help, like the rules said, but that was right before I started writing this, and 15 minutes have long since passed. I checked the revolver I'd been supplied with. I knew it wouldn't do much good. This was only confirmed when I saw that it only had one bullet. A sick feeling washed over me as I held the revolver in my hands. It wasn't there to protect me from those things. It was there to give me a way out in case it was going to catch me. I think I know what happened to Charlie.